In the last recording, we talked about how to create a pie chart, how to do it effectively, and then customize it. In this unit, I want to talk about how to create column charts. Your book talks about two reasons you might use a column chart instead of a pie chart. The first being if you have multiple categories. In this case, we only have one category. This pie chart was created using these totals, and that's only one category of values. If you have multiple, and we're going to do this as part of the lesson, if you have multiple categories that you want to graph, then a pie chart can't handle that. Another reason to use a column chart instead of a pie chart is if your pie chart values are very, very close to each other. Here we have a very small range, 19.56 to 20.59. All the pie slices look pretty much the same. And so if you're looking at that, it gives you the perception that everything is pretty much the same, but there are some differences. So maybe we want to make those differences stand out a little bit more. A column chart can do that. So let's start with that reason for creating a column chart. I'm going to graph the same data but in a column chart instead of a pie chart so that you can see the differences. In the last unit I showed you how to split the screen so that you can grab the titles that are at the top along with the totals that are way down at the bottom. In this unit I'm going to try a different technique. It kind of ties into unit 5. Instead of splitting the screen, I'm going to freeze these top 4 rows. When you freeze rows, Excel calls it freeze panes, it freezes titles so that as you scroll, they don't move. And you can do that for left and right and up and down, either way. In this case, I only want to do it up and down. The way you freeze panes is you first click on the cell, the first cell that you want to move. Everything above this cell is going to be frozen. And everything to the left, and there isn't anything to the left, will also be frozen. I'm going to go to View and then Freeze Panes. Notice there's a top row option. I can't use that because my row number 1 is blank. Freeze columns, that's not what I want to do. So I have to use the Freeze Panes column. Very important that you select the first cell that you want to move. It scrolls. Now we can see this line that goes across the screen. And as I scroll, the titles stay put and everything else scrolls underneath it. So that allows me to do kind of the same thing we did with split screens, where I can select my titles across the top from my chart and then select the data that goes along with it. It didn't quite work. Let's try again. There we go. So that's the exact same data that I chose to create the pie chart, but this time I'm going to create a column chart. Now, again, because I used a collection of cells, these are not right next to each other. There's not a range of cells. The quick analysis tool is not available, so I have to insert my pie chart or my bar chart, column chart from here. Before I forget, a bar chart is nothing but a column chart turned on its side. The bars go sideways instead of up and down. I want to do a column chart. And it creates a chart and puts it in that top pane. I think what I'm going to do is try to move it down to here so we can see it. And note the differences. Here, the differences in those 5 regions is much more obvious, right, than in that pie chart where every slice was pretty much the same size. But one of the things you should recognize is that the reason it's more obvious is because this pie chart, or this column chart, starts at a value of 85,000. I'm going to move this to its own chart sheet so we can manipulate it a little easier. It's kind of small here. And I'm going to call it column chart 1. And there it is. The regions are a little smaller, but you get the idea here. What you can do with bar charts and line charts, if we do one of those, we'll do those in the next recording, is select that range. And then over here in the Format Axis options, you can go to the text, you can go to the Options, Axis Options, and here's my minimum value. If I change that to 0, notice that once again the bars look very similar. They still show some differences, but they show that these are very similar. In one of the earlier recordings I mentioned that statistics and charts can really be misleading if you're not careful. I mean, in our original chart, before I changed this, let me put it back again. Before I changed it, there looked like there's a significant difference between region 3 and region 4. Well, it's not that significant. Unless 5,000, or was it even that much? I don't even remember the difference in those. I think if we touch it, there it is, 91, and this one is 87. So yeah, that's not even 5,000. If 5,000 in sales out of almost 100,000 is a big deal, then okay, then this chart says what you want it to say. Otherwise, might be better off modifying the chart so that these are a little closer. Maybe manipulate that. 0 might have been extreme, but what if we did 50,000 instead? Right, and then we can see there's some differences. And you can experiment with that and leave it the way you want. I'm going to put it back the way it was when we started. Okay, so that chart now shows, that's one reason to create a column chart, to show a little bit more of the differences that are harder to show on a pie chart. There's no way to manipulate that pie chart to say, make one of these, make the slices bigger, different, using the values that we have. The second reason to create a column chart is if you have lots of categories. In this case, we only had the total category. What if we had a few more? What if I wanted to chart, grab my titles. Now here's an important point. This is actually the second time I've done this recording. The first time I did it, I forgot to select that blank box over there. I want to select my dates and all of these numbers. Whatever you select for your titles, you should be selecting the same number of columns for your data. Or turn it around the other way. However many columns you select in data, you should be selecting the same number in your titles. Otherwise they don't match up and it caused all kinds of grief to the point where I started over again. All right, I want to display the sales in the month of October. So there's the October weeks, and then grab my titles again. And then let's do a bar chart for that, or a column chart for that. Column chart, same thing we did before. And you can't see it, but this is a whole lot better than it was the last time I did it. It just made a mess by not selecting that one cell. So the very first unit that I did, or very first recording I did for this unit, talked about strategically selecting cells when you create your chart to save yourself some time. I messed this one up big time by missing that one cell. It caused me all kinds of trouble. I'm going to move this to a different sheet so once again we can not be so distracted by the data. And I'm going to call this one column chart 2. As with most charts, you should change a chart title. Let's just do a quick review of that. To change a chart title, you select it and then just start typing. This is my October sales. And as you start typing, it fills it in the formula bar up here, and then as soon as you press enter, it changes the title. I can change the font size to make it a little more visible. I can change the font color, and I can even change the font itself to something a little more exciting. Let's go with Algerian. That might be extreme, but you get the idea. Right. So here we see for each one of the regions, how much did they sell in every week. Right. But what if I wanted to switch it around the other way? I want to see for each one of the regions, for each one of the weeks, what did each region sell. So I'm going to flip these around. And now, because I've done it that way, I get this goofy condition with the dates where each date gets its own group of data. Remember, the way to fix that was to click this row down at the bottom, go to the chart options, axis options, and say these are not dates, treat them as text. And that's what I'm looking for. Okay, so now what I have is a chart that shows me for every week what did each region do, and then I can look, obviously this gold region did very, very well for a while there, and then it kind of slacked off. There's really not much consistency here, right? But that's kind of what the chart's going to tell me. So we change the title. Another thing we might want to do is change the gap in between here. To change those, you click on one of the bars. Right, and here's the gap width. Right now it's at 219%. Let's just set it to 0 and see what happens. Notice that the grouping between them is much harder to see now. So let's go back to 100. And we might also want to change the overlap between the series and make it 0. And that kind of squeezes them together, and you can see that. And so by using those two things, you can manipulate these groups, the categories that are on this axis, to squeeze them together or spread them out or do whatever you want to do. Every time you do that, notice the gap width. That's this gap that we're changing. Right? Every time you do that, the width of the bars themselves change. So if you want bars that are a little wider, change the gap so there's a little less of it. So that's one of the things you can do. If you don't like one of the colors, we did this in the pie chart, you can do the same thing here. You can change the colors of the bars. Now I've selected the gray bar, clicked on one of them, and all four of them selected. Okay. And then I can go to the fill options here and fill it with a solid color, or you can use any of these other options here. One of the cool things I liked, I've done this a couple of times, is in bar charts that are fairly simple, you can actually use a picture. And so if we had a picture for region 1 and 2 and 3, maybe the state they were in, you could just use a bar chart with the picture in there, and it repeats the picture over and over and over again to represent the bars. Kind of cool, more than I need here. We'll go with a solid color. Let's just change this one to green, and now we can see that one. So you can change the bar gap, you can change the bar color. Now I might also want to make this value stand out here. Okay. If I click on the orange bar, I can put data values on here. Remember in our pie chart, we put data values inside to show what values each one of these slices represent. You can do the same thing with column charts. If I put a number on top of every one of these bars, however, it's going to really clutter it up. I can do that, especially if the numbers are small, you can do that. But what I'm going to do instead is just make this one stand out because it's big and it looks like the biggest sales in October. Remember with the pie chart, we exploded this piece of pie by selecting the pie. The whole pie is selected. Notice the handle's all the way around. And then clicking the slice to just select that one slice. You do the same thing with the column chart. I selected all of the orange bars, but this is the only one I want. So I'm going to click it, and notice now the other ones are not selected, but this one is. Then I'm going to add to that some data labels. And notice the label is up there, and it's kind of hard to read. It's small. I'll make it bigger here in just a second. And it can be at the end, it can be inside down at the bottom, it can be outside, it can be in all kinds of places. I can even make it stick out like that if I want to. I'm just going to go with the default, which puts it in the end on the outside. Now it's a little small, at least for what I can see here. So I'll make the font bigger. And again, I just selected that one data label, and I can make it a little bigger. And now I can see that this value is 884. So that can come in handy. In the pie chart, we also changed the background color of the chart area. Remember, there are two areas that you can change the background color of. There's the chart area. And by the way, if you're not sure what you have selected, the formatting pane will generally tell you, but what I find is even more convenient is going to the design view, the format view. And up here in the upper left hand corner of the format view toolbar tells you what you currently have selected, the chart area, the chart title. This is the plot area. Notice the plot area is this area. Right? And we can change the background of each of those to whatever we want to do. If I wanted to be consistent, I'd go to the chart area and I'd change it to a gradient fill, and there's that same gradient fill. But notice now that I've done that, it kind of distracts from my chart a little bit. So one solution to that would be to click in the plot area. Yes, I have the plot area selected, and change it to a solid fill. And green may not be the best choice, but maybe a softer yellow, that's not bad. Maybe just white. You can experiment with it until you get what you want. And now it's a little easier to read my graph again. So that's column charts. Again, a bar chart if I want to. I can click in my chart. And in the design view, I can change it and make it a bar chart instead. And they go sideways. Right? I don't like that as much, though. It does still show me all that information. You can make them 3D. You can change the colors. Anything you want to change, simply click on. So that should get you started to be able to create some pretty decent column charts and bar charts.